The clash didn't begin with a gentle disagreement. It erupted with Stephen Miller leaning forward, voice sharp, slicing into Jasmine Crockett's words before she had even completed her thought. The interruption was so sudden, so deliberate, that the entire room seemed to lurch with it. Conversations hushed, eyes darted, and for a split second, the chamber was thick with the kind of tension that only comes when power is being flexed, not with strength but with arrogance. Crockett paused. Her gaze didn't flinch, but her silence spoke louder than Miller's intrusion. He kept pressing, cutting across her again, his tone dripping with the certainty of someone who believed the louder voice always wins. It wasn't the first time he had done this, and he carried himself as though it would be the last word. But in that stillness, there was a charge. Every person watching felt it. The injustice of seeing a black woman, a representative, spoken over as though her presence was an inconvenience rather than a right. The sting of it traveled through the air like static electricity. Viewers at home leaned forward. Phones were already coming out. Clips would soon find their way onto timelines. And yet Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her voice. She didn't snap back. She simply held her ground with the kind of poise that makes arrogance look small. Miller mistook her composure for weakness. That mistake would cost him. Because interruption after interruption was only sharpening the blade she held. In reserve, with each dismissal, with each attempt to silence, the pressure built towards something inevitable, the moment she would no longer be interrupted. He thought this would be routine. He thought she would fold, flustered under his repeated attacks. What Miller didn't understand was that Crockett's calm wasn't surrender. It was strategy. She was giving him space, letting him talk himself into a corner, setting the stage for a line that would not just answer him, but end him. One interruption might have gone unnoticed. Two could have been brushed off. But by the time he cut her off 6 times, the audience knew what was coming, a reckoning. But this wasn't just an interruption. It was the spark to a clash that would echo far beyond that room. This wasn't just a heated moment in a committee room. It was a reflection of something deeper, something that stretched far beyond those 4 walls. Every time Stephen Miller lunged in with an interruption, he wasn't just cutting off Jasmine Crockett. He was reenacting a pattern as old as American politics itself, the silencing of women, especially women of color, in spaces where their voices threatened the established order. For generations. The loudest voices in politics have too often drowned out the most necessary ones. Crockett's words weren't just policy points. They were testimony drawn from lived experience, from communities who rarely get the microphone, let alone the chance to speak uninterrupted. And that's exactly why Miller's tactics struck a nerve. He wasn't just talking over her. He was trying to erase her authority, to reduce her presence to background noise while he dominated the foreground. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. 2 progressive audiences watching. It felt familiar. The boardroom, the classroom, the family gathering, the countless spaces where women of color are asked to wait their turn while someone else takes up the oxygen. But here on the record on camera, Crockett's voice represented more than just herself. She carried the stories of voters, of families, of people who believed in her, not because she shouts, but because she speaks with conviction. Miller's reputation only amplified the tension. Known as a hard-edged strategist with a taste for provocation, he had long cultivated the persona of someone who bulldozes through opposition. In his world, dominance equated to victory. But Crockett wasn't playing his game. She was playing her own, one that didn't rely on volume or venom, but on timing. Already, the murmurs had started online. A clip of Miller's first few interruptions was making the rounds on Twitter, spliced with captions like, "Here we go again," an asterisk, "Let her finish." Viewers were tagging friends, sharing their disbelief. Instagram Reels looped his, sneering interjections side by side with Crockett's patient expressions. The comments filling with fire emojis and words like *Queen energy. The internet could feel something building, even if they hadn't yet heard the line that would break the dam. Inside the chamber. It wasn't just a debate, it was a performance. Every raised eyebrow and crossed arm caught on camera shifted uncomfortably. Staffers scribbled notes, glancing up with the uneasy awareness that this wasn't staying in the room. The story was already spilling outward, feeding a narrative larger than any single argument. Crockett understood this. She wasn't just defending her right to speak, she was defending the right of every unheard voice to demand a seat at the table without being spoken over, dismissed, or erased. Her composure was her protest, patience was her weapon, and her silence, in those moments when Miller tried to steal the floor, was not submission, it was strategy. The stakes were no longer about who won the exchange. They were about what this moment revealed, the way power tries to suffocate dignity, and the way dignity refuses to yield. And for an audience that had been told too many times to tone it down, Crockett's quiet endurance carried a thunderous resonance. The room was restless. The audience online was restless. Everyone was waiting for the breaking point. And when he did it again, jaws dropped. Stephen Miller did not stumble into this moment by accident. His entire public career had been built on a reputation for domination. Not persuasion, not bridge building, but domination. To those who admired him, Miller was the cold-eyed architect, the man unafraid to wield cruelty like a scalpel. To those who opposed him, He was the very embodiment of arrogance, sharp-tongued, unyielding, and smug in the belief that disruption itself was proof of intelligence. Asterisk, his rise to prominence was never about charm. He wasn't the kind of political figure who won people over with warmth or empathy. Instead, he leaned into a different performance, one where bluntness, interruption, and sheer force of will took the place of reason. Time and again, Miller cultivated a persona that thrived on confrontation. He relished the role of villain, a strategist who preferred to corner opponents with rapid-fire attacks and calculated disdain. Asterisk, but beneath that cultivated armor was a contradiction. For all his bravado, Miller often revealed more insecurity than strength. His habit of talking over others wasn't born from confidence. It was born from fear of being challenged, of having his arguments exposed to the light. Those who studied him closely knew the louder he got, the more fragile the case beneath his words became. Asterisk, in political circles, Miller was infamous for this. Journalists described his style as abrasive, almost theatrical in its contempt. He spoke not to engage, but to overwhelm. Not to debate, but to dominate. In his mind, the room only had space for one voice, his own. And in moments when he couldn't hold that monopoly, he worked to destabilize, to make others stumble, to ensure no one else could shine. Asterisk, yet the contradictions didn't end there. Miller often presented himself as a champion of strength and discipline, while his behavior revealed insecurity and fragility. He wrapped himself in the image of strategist, but when confronted with authenticity and truth, he often flailed. His record was littered with moments where bluster fell flat, where audiences saw through the veneer of calculated arrogance and caught glimpses of something smaller. Asterisk, this was the energy he carried into his interruptions of Jasmine Crockett. He believed he could steamroll her, as he had done to countless others. In his mind, she was just another obstacle, another target for the performance of superiority he had rehearsed for years. He underestimated her, and more importantly, he underestimated what she represented. Asterisk, because Stephen Miller had always measured his success by how thoroughly he could eclipse another voice. He assumed politics was a zero-sum game of dominance. He believed his legacy would be written in how many opponents he had silenced, but arrogance blinds. What Miller failed to grasp was that the very tactics he leaned on were the same ones that would amplify his downfall. Asterisk. In the chamber that day, as he interrupted again and again, Miller was not just showing the country his disdain for Crockett. He was showing the country his disdain for dignity itself. And the cameras caught every frame of it, the sharp interjections, by the sneering body language, the restless energy of a man desperate to remain the loudest in the room. Asterisk, yet outside that, chamber audiences were watching through a different lens. They didn't see power in his interruptions. They saw fragility. They didn't hear conviction in his voice. They heard desperation. And while Miller thought his tactics placed him in control, the narrative was slipping away. What looked to him like dominance, to the audience looked like the unraveling of someone too arrogant to realize he was losing. Asterisk. It was the perfect setup for what would come next. A man who had built his brand on interruption now found himself facing someone who refused to be erased. For every ounce of arrogance he displayed, Crockett was waiting with quiet resilience. For every attempt at dismissal, she answered with presence. Asterisk, Miller didn't know it yet, but the more he tried to silence her, the louder her eventual response would echo. His entire performance was setting the stage for his own undoing. But across the table sat someone who had lived through struggles he couldn't begin to imagine. Asterisk, Jasmine Crockett's story didn't begin in the bright lights of a congressional hearing room. It began in the shadows of struggle, in the spaces where voices like hers were often dismissed, overlooked, or outright denied. Long before she sat across from Stephen Miller, Crockett had learned what it meant to be underestimated and what it took to rise above it. Asterisk, she grew up surrounded by people who worked harder than anyone gave them credit for, in communities that endured indignities while holding on to dignity. From an early age, Crockett saw the two Americas, one where power flowed easily to those who had always held it, and another where families scraped, prayed, and fought for every inch of respect. That second America shaped her. It taught her resilience, not as an abstract ideal, but as a daily survival skill. Asterisk, when she pursued law, it wasn't for prestige, it was for justice. Crockett's path as a public defender immersed her in lives too often left behind. She stood beside people accused but voiceless, people facing systems stacked against them. Day after day, she fought for those who had been told their stories didn't matter. In those courtrooms, she learned how to face men who tried to talk over her, belittle her, dismiss her. Every interruption became practice. Every sneer became fuel. Asterisk, Crockett's rise into politics carried the same spirit. She wasn't propelled by elite networks or inherited privilege. She fought for a place, winning elections not because of wealth or connections, but because she spoke a language her constituents understood. The language of truth, dignity, and unapologetic pride in who they were. Her campaign rallies weren't polished spectacles, they were family gatherings. Her speeches weren't rehearsed theater, or raw affirmations of resilience. Asterisk, that authenticity drew people to her. Supporters didn't see her as a politician performing for cameras. They saw her as one of them, someone who had struggled through the same storms and still stood tall. Crockett didn't just represent her district. She carried the weight of countless women who had been spoken over, immigrants who had been sidelined, families who had been forgotten. When she walked into a room, she brought those voices with her. Asterisk, and that's exactly what Miller miscalculated. He saw a single opponent across the table. He didn't see the thousands of stories standing behind her. He thought his interruptions would rattle her. But Crockett had endured far worse interruptions in her life. The kind that came not from raised voices, but from doors slammed shut, opportunities denied, and respect withheld. If those trials hadn't broken her, Miller's arrogance certainly wouldn't. Asterisk, her strength wasn't loud, but it was unshakable. She had cultivated a calm that wasn't passive, but deliberate. It was the calm of someone who understood that dignity is often the sharpest blade against arrogance. In the face of Miller's combative tactics, Crockett's very presence was resistance. Her silence, her patience, her refusal to flinch, all of it communicated power far louder than interruption ever could. Asterisk, because Crockett knew she wasn't there for herself alone. Her words carried the weight of history. Every time she leaned into the microphone, she was amplifying the voices of women told to be quiet, of immigrants told to go back, of citizens told their struggles didn't matter. Her fight was their fight. Her resilience was their resilience. And in that room, she embodied something Miller could never counterfeit: authenticity. Asterisk. This authenticity was why her supporters believed in her so fiercely. Online, young women replayed her speeches like anthems. Immigrant families saw in her a defender of dignity. Even skeptics, those hardened by the belief that politics never truly changes, admitted there was something undeniable about the way she carried herself. She didn't just talk about justice. She lived it, breathed it, became it. Asterisk. And so, when she faced Miller, it wasn't just Jasmine Crockett versus Stephen Miller. It was dignity versus dismissal. It was history's echoes versus the arrogance of the present. It was every community that had been told to sit down, finally standing up through her. Asterisk. Miller, with all his interruptions, had no idea what he was up against. He thought he was silencing one voice. But what he didn't realize was that Crockett's voice wasn't hers alone. It was a chorus of generations, a crescendo of resilience, waiting for the moment to rise above the noise. Asterisk. So when Miller cut her off again, he wasn't just interrupting Jasmine Crockett. He was interrupting every voice she carried with her. Asterisk. The first interruption came like a jab, sharp, sudden, and calculated. Miller's voice slid across Crockett's words before they could fully form. His tone clipped, impatient, dripping. With the kind of arrogance that assumes possession of the room, Crockett didn't flinch, straightened her notes, her posture a quiet refusal to bend. The room buzzed, but she pressed on. Asterisk. Then came the second, this time louder, layered with condescension. His hand twitched in the air as though granting himself permission to dominate. Crockett's eyes narrowed just slightly, the faintest signal of acknowledgement. It wasn't anger, it was awareness. A silent cataloging of what was happening. To the audience, that look said everything. She saw him, she understood him, and she was preparing. Asterisk. By the third, murmurs had begun to ripple through the chamber. Some leaned forward in disbelief, others rolled their eyes. A few exchanged glances that spoke volumes. Asterisk. Is he really doing this again? The repetition was becoming impossible to ignore. Miller's words overlapped hers like static drowning out a melody. Crockett's composure didn't crack. She held the pause, reclaiming the silence, then resumed her sentence with a voice as steady as stone. Asterisk. The fourth interruption felt like escalation. His tone was no longer just dismissive, it was taunting, carrying that smug undertone that said, "I control this stage." Crockett, however, did not match his energy. She didn't snap back. She didn't raise her voice. Instead, her stillness became the counterweight. It was as if his bluster only highlighted her dignity, making his interruptions seem smaller with each attempt. Asterisk. By the fifth, the audience outside the room was restless. On social media, clips were already spreading. The comments were filling. Asterisk. Let her speak. Asterisk. This is getting ridiculous. The collective frustration of those watching was now part of the drama. Every time Miller cut her off, it was like he was cutting off them too. Asterisk. The sixth interruption landed heavy, almost unbearable to witness. His words over hers again. Some in the chamber shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A staffer in the corner rubbed their temple while another jotted a note with nervous haste. And there was Crockett, still steady, still composed, but now her silence had teeth. It was no longer patience, it was a warning. Asterisk. By this point, everyone could feel the tension climbing toward a breaking point. 6 times, 6 blatant dismissals, 6 demonstrations of arrogance. The audience at home gritted their teeth, waiting, yearning for the moment when Miller would finally be stopped. And Crockett knew it too. Asterisk. Her posture shifted ever so slightly. She leaned forward, her hands resting firmly on the desk, her eyes locked not just on Miller, but on everyone watching. It was the smallest movement, yet it carried the weight of inevitability. Something was coming, something different from the silence and composure she had wielded so far. Asterisk. But on the 7th, Crockett finally leaned in, and that's when everything changed. Asterisk. The 7th interruption was supposed to be just like the others. Quick, cutting, meant to seize control before Jasmine Crockett could land her point. Miller leaned in, his voice already spilling over hers, sharp and impatient. But But this time, Crockett didn't let the moment slip past. She lifted her hand slightly, a quiet but commanding gesture, and for the first time Miller hesitated mid-sentence. The room, as if sensing what was about to happen, fell into an uncanny silence. Crockett didn't rush to linger, her composure radiating a calm that drew every eye to her. The silence wasn't empty, it was charged like the air before a storm. Then she leaned forward, her voice measured, deliberate, and low enough that people leaned in without realizing it. Stephen, she began, and the single word landed like a stone in water, rippling through the chamber. She didn't raise her tone, but the clarity in it cut sharper than anything Miller had managed all evening. "You've interrupted me 6 times?" The count was intentional, a reminder etched into the moment. Not 1, not 2, 6. With that, she framed the entire exchange in undeniable truth. Every person watching, every person scrolling through the clips, had the evidence burned into memory. There was no arguing it, no spinning it. The number itself was the indictment. Miller opened his mouth, perhaps to defend himself, perhaps to brush it aside with the arrogance that had carried him this far. But Crockett wasn't finished. She allowed a second pause, short but heavy, before she continued. And every time, she said, her eyes locking onto his. "You didn't silence me. You only proved why I'm here." It was a line. Crafted not for Miller, but for everyone watching. It spoke to the struggle of being interrupted, dismissed, undermined, and it turned that struggle into power. The chamber shifted. You could feel the weight of the words settle onto shoulders. You could see staffers stop writing mid-note. Even those who had grown numb to political theater found themselves caught in the grip of something more real. Miller blinked. For the first time that evening, his expression faltered. The confidence, the smirk, the casual disdain, it all wavered. Just slightly, but enough to mark the change. His hand, once animated, curled back toward himself. Body leaned away, if only by an inch. But in politics, an inch is an admission. Crockett pressed forward, her tone still even, but her words carrying the quiet thunder of lived truth. "You think interruptions are strength, but all they do is reveal fear. Fear of what happens when you have to listen." That line was the dagger. Simple, unadorned, undeniable. The crowd reaction was instantaneous. Few audible gasps, a muffled chuckle of disbelief, the faint smack of a hand covering a mouth in surprise. Some leaned back in their seats, shaking their heads as if to say, did she really just say that? She had. And the force of it left no room for doubt. Miller tried to gather himself, to reassemble the mask. He shifted in his chair, adjusted. His tie, looked down at his notes, as though they held an escape route. But the energy in the room had changed. For the first time, he wasn't steering the exchange, he was reacting to it. Crockett had shifted the axis, and everyone could see it. Outside the room, the impact was instantaneous. Clips of the moment. Her count, her measured delivery, his stunned silence were already flooding Twitter. On TikTok, the line was being looped, slowed down for dramatic effect, captioned with text like the moment he realized he lost. On Instagram, reels popped up within minutes, paired with soundtracks that turned her delivery into cinematic, crescendo. Comments poured in. "This is how you handle arrogance." She carried every one of us in that room. That silence after she spoke, chills. The validation was everywhere, spilling across timelines and waves. Miller, once master of disruption, had become the meme. Crockett, once target of dismissal, had become the moment. Back in the chamber. The silence stretched. Miller didn't interrupt again. He couldn't. Every eye was on him, waiting, almost daring him to try. But the balance had shifted. Any further interjection would only deepen the impression that he was flailing. Knew it. Everyone knew it. And so, for the first time, Jasmine Crockett spoke without interruption. Each word afterward carried more weight than the one before, not just because of what she said, but because of what had been revealed. That Miller's interruptions were powerless against composure. That arrogance shrinks in the face of dignity. Her 7th line was more than a comeback. It was a reclamation. It turned a pattern of dismissal into undeniable proof of why her presence mattered, why her voice carried, why she could not be erased. It wasn't just the silencing of Miller. It was the amplification of everyone he had tried, symbolically, to silence through her The room knew it. The internet knew it. And Miller, sitting back in his chair, adjusting papers he would never recover with, knew it most of all. And while the room was stunned, the internet was about to explode. The moment Jasmine Crockett delivered her 7th line, the chamber froze, but outside, the digital world roared awake. Within minutes, clips of her calm, cutting rebuttal lit up Twitter feeds, Instagram reels, and TikTok loops. The words weren't just replayed, they were remixed, captioned, and amplified. Hashtags emerged like sparks catching in dry grass. Let her speak. Crockett clapback. 7th line. Each one spread like wildfire, carried by the collective frustration that had been simmering for years and had now found its release in a single, unforgettable moment. On Twitter, the short clip of Miller's stunned silence went viral within the hour. Side-by-side edits popped up, Miller leaning in to interrupt, juxtaposed against Crockett's poised takedown. Captions wrote themselves. This is what composure looks like, or asterisk arrogance meet reality. For every frame of Miller's faltering expression, there were thousands of laughing emojis, thousands of retweets, thousands of voices relishing the reversal of power. Asterisk TikTok creators moved quickly. One slowed the video down, layering it with dramatic music, a crescendo building until Crockett's words landed like a final drum beat. Another added subtitles in bold white letters. 6 times he tried. The 7th she ended it. Users stitched themselves into the clips, shaking their heads, clapping. Lie p-syncing Crockett's line as if it belonged to them too. The younger audience that often drifted past political content found themselves locked in, replaying the scene over and over. Asterisk celebrities joined in. A Grammy-winning artist tweeted simply, asterisk respect. A late-night comedian posted a meme comparing Miller's face in that moment to a deflated balloon. Political commentators across networks couldn't resist weighing in either. On progressive talk shows, Crockett's poise was lauded as the textbook example of how to dismantle arrogance without raising your voice. Even some centrist analysts admitted Miller had been checkmated. Everyone knew it. Asterisk supporters of Crockett flooded Instagram with collages of her throughout the hearing. Her calm face contrasted against his flustered interruptions. The comments section read like a chorus. Asterisk, she carried us all. Asterisk, this is the energy we need. Asterisk, every little girl watching knows what strength looks like now. Her base wasn't just proud, they were validated. The exchange had crystallized everything they admired in her resilience, composure, authenticity. Asterisk, meanwhile, Miller became the internet's newest caricature. Memes sprouted overnight. Split-screen images labeling him the interrupter, and Crockett the finisher. Gifs of his faltering silence circulated with captions like asterisk, when you realize you picked the wrong opponent. For someone who had built a reputation on dominance, his defeat became content, comedy, and catharsis for millions. Asterisk, but the shockwaves went beyond amusement. Activists seized the moment, tying it to broader conversations about representation and respect. Advocacy groups released statements praising Crockett's restraint and composure, highlighting how her performance mirrored the lived experiences of countless women of color. They pointed out what so many felt watching, that this wasn't just about a single man interrupting a single woman. It was about a pattern that plays out in workplaces, classrooms, and homes across the country. Asterisk, even those who had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before that night now knew her name. Search engines recorded a surge of queries. Asterisk, who is Jasmine Crockett? Asterisk Crockett's 7th line. In less than a day, she had gone from representative to national figure. Her voice elevated far beyond the boundaries of her district. Asterisk for Miller, the ripple effects cut differently. His name trended, yes, but not as he had intended. It had become a symbol of exactly what audiences were tired of: the arrogance of interruption, the fragility hidden beneath bluster. His supporters tried to spin the moment, but the sheer volume of memes, hashtags, and clips drowned them out. In the battle for narrative, Crockett had seized control. Asterisk, the wildfire of reactions, was not just noise, it was validation. It was catharsis. It was millions of people recognizing themselves in her triumph. The digital celebration was loud, joyful, unrelenting. Yet beneath the laughter, beneath the applause and the memes, something deeper was stirring. Because audiences weren't just asking, "Did you see that?" They were asking why it resonated so powerfully. Why did this single exchange cut so deeply into the national conversation? Why did it feel bigger than politics, bigger than one hearing, bigger than one clash of personalities? Asterisk, but beneath the memes, a deeper question lingered. Why did this one exchange matter so much? When the laughter faded and the hashtags began to slow, what remained was the question of why asterisk. Why had this moment traveled so far, cut so deeply, echoed so loudly? Across the country, the answer wasn't found in the mechanics of debate or the theater of politics. It was found in the values beneath the words, the contrast between arrogance and dignity, between disruption and truth. Asterisk, Crockett's 7th line resonated because it flipped the script on a dynamic millions know too well. Too often, those who wield power confuse volume with strength, interruption with authority. Too often, dignity is forced to yield space to arrogance. Yet in that instant, Crockett revealed something timeless, that true strength lies not in shouting the loudest, but in standing firm, calm, and unshaken. Asterisk, her response wasn't about scoring points. It wasn't about embarrassing Stephen Miller, though his stunned silence became the punchline. It was about reframing the entire encounter. Every interruption became evidence of fragility. Every dismissal became proof of why her presence was necessary. What Miller meant as an erasure became, in her hands, validation. Asterisk, and that's why the moment grew beyond two people. It became a parable of justice versus injustice, respect versus contempt, Crockett's calm defiance stood for every teacher spoken over in a classroom, every immigrant dismissed at a counter, every woman ignored in a meeting. She wasn't just answering Miller, she was answering a culture of dismissal, a legacy of silencing. In a way, her words tapped into something profoundly American, the idea that dignity belongs to all, that justice requires listening, that strength is proven in composure, not cruelty. It was a reminder of the values that claim to define the nation: equality, fairness, respect. Crockett didn't wield those words as slogans. She embodied them in action. Asterisk audiences felt that embodiment. That's why the reaction wasn't just amusement, it was relief, it was pride. For progressives, it was a moment of long-awaited validation, proof that truth, carried with calm confidence, can cut sharper than arrogance. For communities long silenced, it was a glimpse of themselves not just surviving but prevailing. And in a political world saturated with noise, that clarity mattered. It reminded people of what politics could be when stripped of the theater of interruption. A forum where dignity commands more power than disruption ever could. Asterisk. The moment crystallized into something larger. A lesson about voice, about resilience, about what it means to face down arrogance without surrendering dignity. Crockett showed that the best answer to contempt is composure, that the most devastating response to fear is truth, spoken calmly, steadily, unshaken. Asterisk, and that's why her seventh line wasn't just an answer to Stephen Miller. It was an answer for all of us. Asterisk. Stephen Miller thought 6 interruptions would be enough to drown out Jasmine Crockett, thought arrogance could erase dignity, that disruption could silence truth. But her 7th line proved him wrong. In that moment, she didn't just shut him down, she showed the nation what composure, courage, and conviction looked like in the face of arrogance. Asterisk, that's why this exchange matters. It wasn't simply a debate or a headline, it was a reminder of who we are when we refuse to be erased. Crockett's voice carried not only her own truth, but the dignity of every person who has ever been told to sit down, be quiet, or wait their turn. She turned interruption into affirmation, and arrogance into its own defeat. Asterisk, and now the choice is ours, whether to let this moment fade as just another viral clip, or to carry its lesson forward, because dignity deserves amplification, respect deserves defenders, truth deserves more than silence, deserves a chorus. Asterisk, so if this moment spoke to you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, let it travel. Let the world see that arrogance can be dismantled without shouting, that truth can triumph without theatrics. Subscribe, join this community, stand with those who refuse to be silenced. Asterisk, Jasmine Crockett's 7th line was more than a comeback. It was a message that says, no matter how many times arrogance interrupts, dignity will always find the final word. Asterisk, and in that truth lies the reason we watch, the reason we share, and the reason we keep believing in a politics that belongs to all.